The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across Silver Peak, Nevada, as Hannah Zimmer clutched her tattered journal to her chest and stepped off the dusty stagecoach. Her throat constricted with familiar panic, rendering her mute as the driver called for someone to help with her trunk. She had fled 2,000 miles west with nothing but nightmares and silence as her companions, hoping the frontier might heal what Boston society had broken. Silver Peak bustled with end-of-day activity miners trudging home, saloon doors swinging, merchants closing shop. Hannah's pale blue dress, once fashionable in Massachusetts, now marked her as painfully out of place. She hadn't spoken a single word since the attack 3 months ago, and now, surrounded by strangers in this raw mining town, her silence felt like an anchor dragging her beneath turbulent waters. The stagecoach driver cleared his throat impatiently. "Madam, your belongings." Hannah nodded shakily, pointing to her trunk with trembling fingers. "Need some assistance, miss?" The deep voice startled her. Hannah whirled around to face a tall man with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. His clothes were trail-worn but clean denim pants, cotton shirt, leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat he now held respectfully in calloused hands. Unlike most men she'd encountered on her journey west, he didn't seem irritated by her silence. She felt the familiar tightening of her throat, the panic rising as she tried and failed to produce words. Her eyes widened in distress. The cowboy studied her face, then offered a gentle smile. "Take your time," he said softly. "I'll wait as long as you need." Something in his patient tone caused tears to blur Hannah's vision. She blinked them back, pulling a small slate and chalk from her handbag. With shaky letters she wrote, "My name is Hannah Zimmer. I am expected at Mrs. Whitley's boarding house." "Grant Abernathy," he replied with a slight bow. "And as luck would have it, I'm headed that direction. May I escort you and your trunk to Mrs. Whitley's?" Hannah hesitated, studying his face for any hint of deception. In Boston, she'd learned the hard way that handsome faces often concealed dangerous intentions. But there was something genuine in Grant Abernathy's weathered features that compelled her to nod. As Grant lifted her trunk with ease, Hannah noticed a silver star pinned to his vest, partially hidden beneath his duster. The town's sheriff, then. Perhaps this was a stroke of good fortune after all, new to Silver Peak. Grant asked as they walked, keeping his pace unhurried to match her smaller steps. Hannah nodded, scribbling on her slate. "Arrived today. Teaching position at the school." Grant read her words and smiled. "Mrs. Peterson mentioned a new teacher was coming. The children will be mighty glad. Our last teacher left 6 months ago to get married in California." They turned down a quieter street lined with modest houses, the setting sun casting long shadows across the dirt road. A 2-story clapboard house with a neat picket fence came into view, a painted sign reading "Whitley Boarding House" hanging by the gate. "Mrs. Whitley runs the finest boarding house in Silver Peak," Grant explained, "which isn't saying much since it's also the only one." His warm chuckle invited her to share in the humor. Hannah managed a small smile as they approached the house. The door opened before they reached the porch, revealing a plump woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. Sheriff Abernathy. "And this must be Miss Zimmer," the woman called out. "I'm Eleanor Whitley. We've been expecting you, dear." Hannah nodded politely, clutching her slate tighter. "Miss Zimmer has had a long journey, Mrs. Whitley," Grant explained, setting the trunk down on the porch. "She communicates through writing for now." Hannah shot him a grateful glance, relieved she wouldn't have to explain her condition yet again. "Well, that's no trouble at all," Mrs. Whitley said, her voice gentler now. "We're just glad you've arrived safely. Come in, come in." Supper's nearly ready, and you must be famished after that dreadful stagecoach ride." Hannah wrote quickly, "Thank you for your kindness." "No need for thanks, child. This is your home now," Mrs. Whitley replied warmly. Grant tipped his hat. "I'll leave you in Mrs. Whitley's capable hands, Miss Zimmer. If you need anything, the sheriff's office is just off Main Street, next to the general store." As he turned to leave, Hannah impulsively reached out, touching his arm lightly. When he looked back, she wrote quickly, "Thank you for your patience." "Most people become frustrated with me." Grant's expression softened. "Most people are in too much of a hurry to appreciate silence, Miss Zimmer." He smiled again. "Welcome to Silver Peak. I hope our little town brings you whatever you're looking for." As Hannah watched him walk away, something unfamiliar fluttered in her chest, not fear or anxiety, but a tentative spark of hope. Perhaps Silver Peak would indeed offer what she desperately needed: a fresh start and a safe haven far from the shadows that had stolen her voice. Mrs. Whitley ushered Hannah inside, chattering about dinner and introducing her to the other boarders, two elderly sisters who owned the millinery shop, and a middle-aged male clerk from the assayer's office. Hannah's room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a desk by the window overlooking the street. A bookshelf held a few worn volumes, and a rag rug brightened the plank floor. "Rest a bit before supper, dear," Mrs. Whitley suggested. "You must be exhausted." Alone at last, Hannah sank onto the bed, opening her journal to record her first impressions of Silver Peak. Her hands shook less as she wrote about the dusty streets, the distant mountains, the kind landlady, and the sheriff with patient eyes who had waited for words that wouldn't come. For the first time in 3 months, Hannah felt the iron grip of terror loosen slightly around her heart. The school bell rang precisely at 8 o'clock Monday morning, its clear tone carrying across Silver Peak. Hannah stood beside the schoolhouse door, her heart pounding as children streamed into the yard. She wore her best dress navy blue with white piping and had pinned her chestnut hair in a tidy bun, hoping to project confidence she didn't feel. How could she teach when she couldn't speak? Mrs. Peterson, the school board president who had hired her through correspondence, stood beside her. "Don't worry, Miss Zimmer. I've explained your situation to the parents. The children know you'll be using the slate and writing instructions on the blackboard." Hannah nodded gratefully, clutching her teaching materials. She had spent Sunday preparing, writing out lessons and planning how to manage a classroom without verbal commands. Still, dread coiled in her stomach like a rattlesnake. 23 students, ranging from 6 to 16 years old, filed into the one-room schoolhouse. Hannah took a deep breath and walked to the front, writing in large letters, "Good morning. I am Miss Zimmer, your new teacher." The children stared with undisguised curiosity. A small boy in the front raised his hand. "Miss Zimmer, is it true you can't talk at all?" Mrs. Peterson began to scold him, but Hannah shook her head and wrote, "I cannot speak right now, but I can hear perfectly. I will write what I need to say. Like a game of charades," asked a freckle-faced girl. Hannah smiled and wrote, "Sometimes. We'll learn together." By mid-morning, Mrs. Peterson had left, and Hannah was settling into a rhythm. The older students helped with the younger ones, and she found that certain hand gestures worked well for common instructions. Still, by noon, her hands ached from constant writing and exhaustion tugged at her. As the children ate their lunches in the schoolyard, Hannah remained at her desk, too tired to join them. She was startled by a knock at the open door. Sheriff Grant Abernathy stood in the doorway, holding a cloth-wrapped package. "Miss Zimmer, hope I'm not intruding." Hannah shook her head, gesturing for him to enter. She quickly wrote on her slate, "The sheriff checks on the schoolhouse." Grant smiled, setting the package on her desk. "Mrs. Whitley mentioned you left without lunch this morning. She asked me to bring this by." Hannah blushed, touched by the thoughtfulness. She wrote, "Please thank her for me." "You can thank her yourself this evening," Grant replied, then hesitated. "How's your first day going?" Hannah considered the question, then wrote honestly, "Challenging but better than expected. The children are adapting quickly." "Children are remarkably resilient," Grant agreed. "More so than most adults, I find." Hannah nodded, then impulsively added, "As is their sheriff, it seems." "Most men would find my condition frustrating." Grant studied her words, then met her eyes with unexpected seriousness. "Your condition is simply part of who you are right now, Miss Zimmer, not who you'll always be." His words struck her with such force that tears threatened. No one had suggested her silence might be temporary since the Boston doctors had declared her case hysterical aphonia and recommended institutionalization, a fate her father had rejected, instead arranging for her to take this teaching position in Nevada through his business connections. Hannah wrote quickly, "You seem very certain about that." Grant leaned against the desk, his expression thoughtful. "My younger sister didn't speak for nearly 2 years after our mother died. Doctors said all manner of things, but one day, when she was good and ready, she started talking again." This revelation stunned Hannah. She wrote, "What happened?" "She found her reason to speak," Grant said simply. "I suspect you will too when the time is right." Before Hannah could respond, children began streaming back into the classroom. Grant straightened, tipping his hat. "Enjoy your lunch, Miss Zimmer. I look forward to hearing how the rest of your day goes." As he walked out, Hannah realized the double meaning in his words, his quiet confidence that someday she would tell him herself. The afternoon lessons went more smoothly. Hannah was demonstrating multiplication on the blackboard when she noticed several students looking toward the windows. Following their gaze, she saw dark clouds gathering over the mountains. One of the older boys raised his hand. "Miss Zimmer, that's a bad storm coming." "Pa says when clouds look like that, we need to get home quick." Hannah frowned, moving to the window. The sky had turned an ominous greenish black, and wind was picking up, swirling dust in the yard. She hadn't anticipated ending school early on her first day, but the weather looked genuinely threatening. She wrote quickly on the board, "We will dismiss early today. Older students, please escort younger ones home directly." As the children gathered their things, the wind intensified, rattling the windows. Hannah helped the smallest children with their jackets, worry gnawing at her. The storm was approaching faster than she had realized. The door burst open, and Grant appeared, his duster whipping around his legs. "Flash flood coming," he announced to the room. "The mining camp got hit hard and the water's headed this way. Everyone needs to get to higher ground." The children's faces paled. Hannah grabbed her slate. "What should we do?" "The children who live in town can make it home," Grant said. "Those from outlying farms need to stay at the courthouse until it's safe." He turned to the oldest boy. "James, take the Miller twins and Sarah to the courthouse. The rest of you, straight home." The children moved with surprising order, clearly practiced in emergency procedures. Within minutes, the schoolhouse was empty except for Hannah and Grant. "You too, Miss Zimmer," Grant said. "The boarding house is on low ground." Hannah grabbed her shawl and bag, following Grant outside. The wind nearly knocked her over, and she could hear a distant roaring sound that made her blood run cold. "That's the floodwater," Grant confirmed, taking her elbow. "We need to move quickly." They hurried down the street, passing townspeople securing buildings and livestock. The sky had darkened to near night, though it was only mid-afternoon. As they reached Main Street, Hannah saw water already beginning to flow between buildings on the lower end of town. Grant's grip on her arm tightened. "Change of plans. The water's moving faster than I thought." The courthouse is too far. He pulled her toward a two-story brick building. The bank's on higher ground and built solid. They weren't the only ones seeking shelter. As Grant pushed open the heavy doors, Hannah saw several townspeople already inside, including Mrs. Whitley, who rushed forward. "Oh, thank heavens you found her, Sheriff. I was so worried about our teacher." Hannah smiled gratefully at the older woman, but her attention was drawn to the windows, where she could see water now flowing steadily down Main Street, carrying debris and rising quickly. "Everyone stay calm," Grant announced to the room. "This building is secure. The water should recede by morning." A night trapped in the bank with strangers was not how Hannah had envisioned ending her first day of teaching. She found a quiet corner and sat on a wooden bench, watching as Grant organized the 20-some people, assigning tasks and offering reassurance. Mrs. Whitley joined her, patting her hand. "First the stage coach, then your first day teaching, and now a flood. What a welcome to Silver Peak, my dear." Hannah managed a smile, writing, "At least it's not dull." Mrs. Whitley laughed. "That's the spirit. And look at our sheriff taking charge. He's a good man, that Grant Abernathy. Came here 5 years ago and turned this town around. Before him, Silver Peak was as lawless as they come." Hannah watched Grant helping an elderly man to a more comfortable seat. There was a quiet competence about him that drew her eye. She wrote, "He mentioned a sister." "Mary," Mrs. Whitley nodded. "Lives in Carson City now with her husband. Lovely girl. Their parents died in a fire back in Missouri when Grant was just 18. He raised Mary himself." This new information added depth to her understanding of the sheriff. A man who had shouldered such responsibility at a young age would understand something about trauma and loss. As evening approached, someone produced lanterns and others shared what food they had brought. Grant organized watches for the night, then made his way over to Hannah. "How are you holding up, Miss Zimmer?" he asked, sitting beside her on the bench. She wrote, "I'm fine. Concerned about my students. They're all accounted for," Grant assured her. "I checked with everyone who came in. The children at the courthouse are safe with Judge Parker and his wife." Hannah nodded, relieved. She hesitated, then wrote, "Thank you for coming to the school." Grant's expression softened. "I was concerned about you. First day teaching and then this." He gestured toward the windows where water continued to flow past. Not exactly a typical Silver Peak welcome. Hannah surprised herself with a silent laugh, writing, "Mrs. Whitley said something similar." "Great minds," Grant said with a wink that caused an unexpected flutter in Hannah's chest. He seemed about to say more when someone called his name from across the room. "Duty calls," he sighed. "Try to get some rest, Miss Zimmer. It's going to be a long night." As Grant moved away, Hannah opened her journal and began to write by lantern light, recording the day's events. Despite the danger and discomfort, she felt strangely at peace. For the first time since the attack, she was too focused on immediate concerns to be consumed by fear. Later, as most people dozed on makeshift bedding, Hannah found herself unable to sleep. She moved to the window, watching the moonlight reflect off the floodwaters. The rain had stopped, but the street remained a rushing river. "Can't sleep," Grant's voice came softly from behind her. Hannah shook her head, turning to face him. In the dim light, his features were softer, the lines of responsibility less pronounced. "Me neither," he admitted. "Too much on my mind." Hannah tilted her head questioningly. "Worrying about damage to the mines, mostly," Grant explained. "This town lives and dies by silver. If the main shaft is flooded badly, a lot of folks will be out of work." Hannah hadn't considered the economic impact of the flood. She wrote, "Can they pump it out?" "Eventually, but it takes time and money." Grant leaned against the window frame. "Silver Peak's been through hard times before. We'll manage." Hannah studied his face, sensing there was more he wasn't saying. She wrote, "You care deeply about this town." Grant nodded, gazing out at the water. "It gave me a second chance. Seems only fair I return the favor." Hannah wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his expression stopped her. Instead, she wrote, "I'm seeking a second chance too." Grant turned to her, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "I figured as much. People don't usually choose to teach in a mining town unless they're running to something or from something." Hannah's hand trembled slightly as she wrote, "Perhaps both." "No need to explain," Grant said gently. "Silver Peak has a way of accepting people as they are. No questions asked about what came before." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes at his understanding. She hadn't expected to find such acceptance in this rough frontier town. Grant seemed to sense her emotion. "The water's receding already," he observed, changing the subject. "By morning, we should be able to start assessing damage." Hannah nodded, grateful for his tactful shift. They stood in companionable silence, watching the moonlit water together, until exhaustion finally overcame her and she returned to her makeshift bed. As she drifted toward sleep, Hannah realized that for the first time in months, she had spent hours without feeling afraid. The flood waters receded by morning as Grant had predicted, leaving Silver Peak muddy but largely intact. The lower portions of town had suffered the most damage, with several homes and businesses taking on water. Thankfully, no lives were lost, a fact that Grant attributed to the town's well-practiced emergency procedures. "Mining towns learn to prepare for disaster," he explained as he escorted Hannah back to the boarding house through the muddy streets. "Silver Peak has seen floods, fires, cave-ins. You develop a certain resilience." Hannah wrote on her slate, "The school. On high ground, so minimal damage," Grant assured her. "Though I expect attendance might be spotty for a few days while families deal with cleanup." The boarding house had escaped with just a muddy ground floor, which Mrs. Whitley was already attacking with mop and bucket when they arrived. "Oh, Miss Zimmer, thank goodness you're all right," she exclaimed, setting aside her cleaning tools. "Your room is fine, not a drop of water upstairs." Hannah wrote, "Can I help with the cleaning?" "Nonsense, dear, you should rest. That was quite an ordeal for your first days in town." Grant cleared his throat. "Actually, Mrs. Whitley, I was hoping Miss Zimmer might assist me with something if she's willing." Both women looked at him with surprise. "We're organizing relief supplies at the courthouse," Grant explained. "I could use someone with good handwriting to help record distributions and needs, since school will likely be canceled today." Hannah didn't hesitate before nodding her agreement. After the shared experience of the flood night, she felt connected to Silver Peak in a way she hadn't expected. Helping with relief efforts seemed natural. "Splendid," Mrs. Whitley approved. "Just change into something more practical first, dear. That dress won't survive mud duty." An hour later, Hannah found herself at a table in the courthouse, cataloging donations and requests as townspeople streamed in and out. Wearing a simple brown skirt and white shirtwaist, with her hair braided simply down her back, she worked efficiently alongside Grant and Judge Parker. "You have a gift for organization, Miss Zimmer," Judge Parker commented, watching her create a systematic ledger of available supplies and where they were most needed. Hannah smiled her thanks, continuing to work. The busy activity kept her mind focused outward rather than on her own troubles, a welcome change. By midday, she had developed a rationing system that ensured the most severely affected families received priority assistance. Grant brought her a cup of coffee and a sandwich around noon. "You've impressed the judge," he said quietly, "and that's not easily done." Hannah wrote quickly, "Happy to help. This feels purposeful." Grant nodded, understanding. "Nothing like a crisis to forge connections. You're becoming part of Silver Peak already." The simple observation touched Hannah deeply. In Boston, after the attack, she had felt increasingly isolated, a broken thing to be whispered about and avoided. Here, despite her silence, people simply worked around her limitation, valuing what she could contribute. As afternoon stretched into evening, Hannah found herself working side by side with Grant, their movements falling into a natural rhythm. He seemed to anticipate when she needed something, and she developed an instinct for organizing exactly what he was looking for before he asked. "We make a good team, Miss Zimmer," Grant observed as they finished distributing the last of the day's supplies. Hannah nodded, then wrote, "Hannah, please call me Hannah." Grant's eyes crinkled with a smile. "Hannah," he repeated as if testing the name. "And I'm Grant, at least when I'm not wearing this." He tapped the sheriff's star pinned to his vest. The courthouse had quieted, most volunteers and townspeople having returned home for dinner. Judge Parker approached them, looking pleased. "Fine work today, both of you," he said. "Sheriff, you should see Miss Zimmer home before it gets dark. Those streets are still treacherous." "My pleasure," Grant replied. "Ready, Hannah?" The sound of her given name in his deep voice caused a warmth to spread through her chest. She nodded, gathering her shawl. The evening air was crisp and clean after the storm, the setting sun casting long shadows across the muddy streets. They walked slowly, navigating around puddles and debris. "School will probably remain closed tomorrow," Grant said. "The relief committee could use your help again, if you're willing." Hannah wrote, "I would like that." "Good," Grant replied simply. They continued in comfortable silence for several blocks before he spoke again. "I meant what I said earlier, you're becoming part of Silver Peak. People notice how hard you're working despite." He gestured vaguely toward her slate. Hannah considered his words, then wrote carefully, "In Boston, people only saw what I couldn't do. Here, no one seems to mind." Grant nodded. "Western towns have different priorities. Can you work? Are you honest? You help your neighbors. That matters more than how you talk or don't." As they reached the boarding house, Hannah paused, writing one more note. "Thank you for seeing me as whole, even when I don't feel that way myself." Grant read her words, his expression softening in the fading light. "You are whole, Hannah. Your voice isn't who you are, it's just one way to express it. You're finding others." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes at his simple wisdom. She reached out impulsively, squeezing his hand in gratitude. Grant returned the pressure gently. "Same time tomorrow. I'll come by after breakfast." Hannah nodded, reluctantly withdrawing her hand. As she watched him walk back toward town, she realized that for the first time in months, she was looking forward to tomorrow. The weeks following the flood brought Hannah more fully into Silver Peak's community life. School resumed, and her students adjusted to her teaching methods with remarkable adaptability. She continued helping with flood recovery efforts in the evenings and weekends, working frequently alongside Grant. As October gave way to November, their friendship deepened. Grant made a habit of walking her home from school several times a week, their conversations conducted through her slate becoming increasingly personal. She learned about his childhood in Missouri, his time as a Union soldier during the final year of the Civil War when he was barely 18, and his journey west with his sister, Mary, after their parents' death. He shared stories of Silver Peak's early days, when he'd first pinned on the sheriff's star and faced down a gang of claim jumpers who had terrorized the town. In turn, Hannah gradually revealed pieces of her own past, her comfortable upbringing in Boston as the daughter of a successful merchant, her love of literature and music, her dream of someday traveling to Europe. She found herself able to write about nearly everything except the attack that had stolen her voice. Whenever her thoughts approached that dark day, her hands would tremble too severely to continue. Grant never pressed when she abruptly changed subjects or claimed fatigue. His patience remained steadfast, true to his first promise that he would wait as long as she needed. On a crisp November afternoon, Hannah dismissed her students early so she could help decorate the town hall for Silver Peak's Thanksgiving celebration. As she pinned up paper chains made by her students, she spotted Grant entering with a load of firewood. He nodded greeting, depositing the wood by the large stone fireplace. "Decorations look festive," he commented, brushing sawdust from his hands. Hannah smiled, writing, "The children were excited to contribute. James Peterson has quite an artistic talent." "Not surprising. His mother paints beautiful landscapes," Grant replied, helping her hang a particularly long chain of colorful papers. "Speaking of the Thanksgiving celebration, would you allow me to escort you? Officially, I mean." Hannah's heart skipped a beat at the formal invitation. Over the past weeks, she had grown increasingly aware of Grant as more than just a kind sheriff or helpful friend. His visits to the schoolhouse, their walks together, the gentle way he anticipated her needs without making her feel helpless, all had awakened feelings she had thought destroyed forever. But fear still lingered beneath the surface. Hannah hesitated, her chalk hovering over the slate. Grant misinterpreted her pause. "Forgive me if I've overstepped," he said quickly. "I just thought." Hannah shook her head emphatically, writing rapidly, "You haven't overstepped. I would like that very much." Relief and pleasure transformed Grant's face. "Wonderful. It's a proper celebration dinner, music, even dancing afterward." Hannah bit her lip, writing, "I'm not much of a dancer these days." "Then we'll sit and watch the others," Grant said simply. "Or take a walk under the stars, whatever makes you comfortable." His easy acceptance nearly undid her. Most men would have been disappointed, would have encouraged her to try anyway, not understanding how terrifying the thought of being enclosed in someone's arms could be. But Grant simply adjusted his expectations without complaint. "You are a rare man, Sheriff Abernathy," she wrote. "Just practical," he demurred, though his eyes warmed at her words. "Now, where do you want these pine boughs?" They worked together for the next hour, the hall gradually transforming with evergreen decorations, ribbons, and candles. Other townspeople joined them, bringing food and additional decorations. Mrs. Peterson, head of the celebration committee, directed operations with cheerful efficiency. "Miss Zimmer, would you play the piano for us during dinner? Mrs. Whitley says you're quite accomplished." Hannah froze, her hands suddenly cold. She hadn't touched a piano since before the attack, though music had once been her greatest joy. She tried to write a polite refusal, but her hand trembled too badly. Grant appeared at her side, sensing her distress. "I believe Miss Zimmer already promised to help serve the children's table," he said smoothly. "Perhaps Mrs. Davidson could play. She mentioned wanting to contribute." Mrs. Peterson nodded, moving on to the next task without noticing Hannah's relief. Grant guided her to a quiet corner, concern evident in his expression. "Too much?" he asked softly. Hannah nodded, embarrassed by her reaction. She forced her hand steady enough to write, "I used to love playing. Now I can't even think about it without panic." Grant didn't offer empty reassurances or press for explanations. Instead, he simply said, "Then you'll serve at the children's table, and I'll help. They'll probably behave better with the sheriff watching anyway." His matter-of-fact acceptance gave Hannah the strength to continue working. By the time they finished decorating, her equilibrium had returned, though the incident had reminded her how fragile her recovery remained. As they walked back to the boarding house in the gathering dusk, Grant said, "I should warn you about something before Thanksgiving." Hannah looked at him questioningly. "My sister Mary and her husband are coming from Carson City for the celebration," he explained. "Mary can be enthusiastic about meeting new people in my life." "In your life?" Hannah wrote, highlighting the phrase with a small smile. Grant's cheeks reddened slightly above his beard. "You know what I mean. She's convinced I need looking after." Hannah's smile widened as she wrote, "I look forward to meeting her. She sounds protective." "That's one word for it," Grant chuckled. "I just wanted to prepare you." Mary doesn't always remember that not everyone appreciates her direct approach. Hannah hesitated, then wrote carefully, "Does she know about my situation?" "Yes," Grant admitted. "I mentioned it in my letter, not the details, just that you communicate through writing for now. For now." There it was again, his unwavering belief that her silence was temporary. Hannah wasn't sure whether to find it touching or naively optimistic. "I don't mind her knowing," she wrote. "It's easier when people are prepared." They reached the boarding house steps, lingering as they often did before parting. The evening air was cold enough to show their breath in small clouds. "Hannah," Grant said, his voice more serious than usual, "there's something else about Thanksgiving." She waited, noting the unusual uncertainty in his expression. "After the celebration, I'd like to show you something, a place that's special to me," he continued. "It's about an hour's ride from town. We could go the next morning if you're willing." The invitation felt significant, though Hannah couldn't quite define why. She wrote, "I'd be honored." Grant's smile returned, warming his eyes. "Good, that's good." He seemed about to say more, then simply tipped his hat. "Sleep well, Hannah." As she watched him walk away, Hannah acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with Grant Abernathy. The realization was both wonderful and terrifying. Love meant vulnerability, and vulnerability had nearly destroyed her once before. That night, Hannah opened the locked drawer in her room and withdrew a letter she had carried from Boston, but never sent a letter to her father explaining why she had fled. Staring at the sealed envelope, she wondered if she would ever be brave enough to face the past that haunted her. For the first time, she considered the possibility of telling Grant the truth. Not now, perhaps not soon, but someday. The thought was frightening, but no longer impossible. Hannah tucked the letter away and opened her journal instead, writing until late into the night, not about the past, but about the possibility of a future she had stopped believing in. Thanksgiving Day arrived with clear skies and unseasonably mild weather. Hannah spent the morning helping at the town hall, arranging tables and placing centerpieces of pine cones and dried berries. Her students had created hand-drawn place cards for each family, and she carefully positioned them according to Mrs. Peterson's seating chart. Just after noon, Grant appeared at the hall with a petite, dark-haired woman and a tall, broad-shouldered man. Hannah recognized Mary Abernathy immediately. She had Grant's expressive eyes and determined chin, though her features were delicate where his were rugged. "Hannah," Grant called, waving her over. "I'd like you to meet my sister Mary and her husband, Thomas Holloway." Hannah smoothed her skirt nervously and approached, slate in hand. Mary stepped forward immediately, clasping Hannah's free hand in both of hers. "Miss Zimmer." "I'm so pleased to finally meet you," Mary exclaimed, her enthusiasm genuine. "Grant's letters have mentioned you so often, I feel we're acquainted already." Hannah blushed, glancing at Grant, who looked slightly embarrassed. She wrote quickly, "Please call me Hannah. It's lovely to meet you both." Thomas Holloway, a ruddy-faced man with kind eyes, nodded politely. "Likewise, Miss Hannah. Mary's been talking of nothing else since we left Carson City." "Thomas," Mary scolded lightly, then turned back to Hannah. "Is there anything we can help with?" "I'm handy with flower arranging, and Thomas is strong enough to move tables." Hannah wrote, "Mrs. Peterson is directing everything. She would welcome the help." As Mary and Thomas moved off to find Mrs. Peterson, Grant stepped closer to Hannah. "Sorry about that." Mary's enthusiasm can be overwhelming. Hannah shook her head, writing, "She's lovely. You can see how much she cares for you." "She does," Grant agreed, "though sometimes her caring takes the form of excessive meddling." His tone was affectionate despite the complaint. Hannah smiled, writing, "She reminds me of my younger sister Rebecca, always trying to manage everyone." Grant looked surprised. "I didn't know you had a sister. You've never mentioned her." Hannah's smile faded. She hesitated, then wrote, "We're not close anymore. After I lost my voice, she found my presence difficult." Grant's expression darkened. "I'm sorry, Hannah. That must have been painful." It had been worse than painful. Rebecca's embarrassment at Hannah's condition, her frustrated attempts to force Hannah to speak, and finally her relief when Hannah announced she was moving west, these had wounded more deeply than the physical attack that started it all. "Family is complicated," she wrote simply. "That it is," Grant agreed, though his gaze drifted to Mary, who was laughing with Mrs. Peterson across the room. "But sometimes they surprise you." The Thanksgiving celebration began at 3 o'clock, with nearly the entire population of Silver Peak gathering in the decorated hall. Hannah found herself at the children's table as planned, with Grant helping distribute food and maintain order among the excited youngsters. Judge Parker offered a lengthy blessing, followed by a speech from Mayor Collins about the town's achievements over the past year and his hopes for continued prosperity. Hannah noticed Grant subtly checking the windows and doors throughout the speeches, his sheriff's instincts never fully at rest even during a celebration. The food was abundant and delicious: roast turkey and ham, mashed potatoes, creamed corn, fresh bread, and pies of every description. Hannah helped the youngest children cut their meat and prevented more than one overturned cup, finding unexpected joy in the simple service. Grant worked alongside her with easy competence, entertaining the children with stories about his own childhood Thanksgivings. Hannah couldn't help noticing how often Mary glanced their way from the main table, her expression speculative and pleased. After the meal, tables were cleared to the sides of the hall, and several townsmen produced fiddles and a banjo. As promised, Grant made no attempt to coax Hannah onto the dance floor. Instead, they sat together watching the lively reels and jigs, occasionally helping serve coffee and desserts. "You look beautiful tonight," Grant said quietly during a lull in the music. Hannah touched her dark green dress self-consciously. It was her best, with lace at the collar and cuffs, but nothing special by Boston standards. "Thank you," she wrote. "You look quite handsome yourself." Grant had traded his usual working clothes for a proper suit, though he still wore his trail-worn boots rather than dress shoes. The combination suited him, Hannah thought, civilized but practical, like Silver Peak itself. "About tomorrow," Grant said, "we should leave fairly early. It's best seen in morning light." Hannah nodded, curious about this special place he wanted to show her. Before she could ask questions, Mary appeared before them, slightly flushed from dancing. "Grant Abernathy, are you going to sit all evening? This is a celebration," she chided. "Hannah and I are perfectly content watching," Grant replied firmly. Mary looked between them, understanding dawning on her face. "Of course," she said more gently. "Well, then perhaps Hannah would like to come meet some of the ladies from my sewing circle. They're visiting from Carson City." Hannah glanced at Grant, who nodded encouragingly. She wrote quickly, "I would be delighted." Mary led her to a group of well-dressed women, making introductions with warm praise of Hannah's teaching and community work. To Hannah's relief, the women accepted her written communications without awkwardness, including her naturally in their conversation about the latest fashions from San Francisco and the upcoming Christmas preparations. From across the room, Hannah could feel Grant watching her. Whenever she glanced his way, their eyes would meet, and a private smile would pass between them. Each such moment strengthened the connection, She felt growing a silent understanding that required no words. Later, as the celebration wound down and families with young children began departing, Mary found a moment alone with Hannah near the punch bowl. "I hope you'll forgive my directness," she began, her voice low, "but I wanted to thank you." Hannah tilted her head questioningly. "For being patient with my brother," Mary continued. "Grant has always been the strong one, taking care of everyone else. After our parents died, he gave up everything to raise me properly. Then this town needed him, and again he stepped up. But he rarely lets anyone take care of him in return." Hannah wasn't sure how to respond to this unexpected confidence. "I've seen how he looks at you," Mary said, smiling gently. "And how you look at him. Just be patient with him. He's not always good at admitting what he needs." Before Hannah could write a reply, Thomas appeared to claim his wife for another dance, leaving Hannah to ponder Mary's words. Was her growing attachment to Grant so obvious? And did he truly return her feelings as Mary suggested? The evening concluded with a final hymn sung by the entire gathering. Hannah mouthed the familiar words silently, feeling connected to the community in a way she hadn't experienced since leaving Boston. As the crowd dispersed into the cold night, Grant appeared at her side with her shawl. "May I walk you home?" Hannah nodded, wrapping the warm wool around her shoulders. They stepped outside into crisp, clear air, the stars brilliant above Silver Peak's darkened streets. "Did you enjoy the celebration?" Grant asked as they walked slowly toward the boarding house. Hannah nodded enthusiastically, writing, "Very much. Your sister is wonderful." "She seems quite taken with you as well," Grant replied, "though I suspect she interrogated you when I wasn't looking." Hannah's smile confirmed his suspicion. She wrote, "She cares about you, it's sweet." "Sweet isn't the word I'd choose," Grant chuckled, then grew more serious. "For tomorrow, dress warmly. The place I want to show you is up in the foothills and it can be chilly even with good weather." Hannah wrote, "Is it very far?" "About an hour on horseback. Do you ride?" Hannah nodded, then added, "Though not recently." "Don't worry. Old Sadie at the livery is gentle as they come," Grant assured her. "I'll pick you up at 8 if that suits you," Hannah wrote. "Perfect. I'm looking forward to it." They had reached the boarding house. Light still shone from the windows, where Mrs. Whitley was likely waiting up for her boarders. "Hannah," Grant said softly, taking her hand, "thank you for today. For everything, really. Having you in Silver Peak these past months has been—" He searched for words, then simply said, "important to me." Hannah felt warmth spread through her chest at his earnest declaration. With her free hand she wrote, "You have been important to me too, more than I can express." Grant's fingers tightened gently around hers. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, and a mixture of anticipation and fear fluttered in her stomach. Instead, he lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a courtly gesture that somehow felt more intimate than a conventional kiss. "Until tomorrow," he said, releasing her hand reluctantly. Hannah nodded, suddenly unable to write though she had so much she wanted to say. She watched him walk away, his tall figure soon swallowed by the darkness. Inside, Mrs. Whitley waited in the parlor, knitting by lamplight. "Did you have a lovely time, dear?" she asked, eyes twinkling knowingly. Hannah nodded, unable to hide her flushed cheeks. "Sheriff Abernathy looked very handsome in his suit," Mrs. Whitley observed innocently. "And he scarcely took his eyes off you all evening." Hannah blushed deeper, writing quickly, "It's getting late. I should retire." Mrs. Whitley smiled indulgently. "Of course, dear. Rest well. I expect tomorrow will be an important day." Hannah wondered at the landlady's comment as she climbed the stairs to her room. Did everyone in Silver Peak know about her outing with Grant tomorrow? And why did they all seem to view it with such significance in her room? Hannah prepared for bed with care, laying out her warmest riding skirt and jacket for the morning. As she brushed her hair before the small mirror, she studied her reflection critically. The woman looking back at her had changed in subtle ways since arriving in Silver Peak. The haunted look had faded from her eyes, replaced by a cautious hope. Her face had gained color from outdoor activity, and she had put on healthy weight thanks to Mrs. Whitley's cooking. She was healing, slowly but surely. The question was whether she could heal enough to offer Grant what he deserved, a whole woman, not one fractured by fear and silence. Hannah opened her journal and wrote late into the night, trying to sort through her tangled emotions. When she finally slept, her dreams were not of the attack for once, but of high mountain meadows and Grant's patient smile. Morning arrived with perfect clarity, the November air crisp but not bitter. Hannah dressed with care in her navy riding skirt, white shirtwaist, and warm jacket, her hair braided and pinned securely for riding. Mrs. Whitley provided a hearty breakfast and packed a small bundle of food, just in case you get hungry up in those hills. Promptly at 8, Grant arrived at the boarding house leading 2 horses, his own bay gelding, and a gentle-looking dappled mare that Hannah assumed was Sadie. "Good morning," he greeted her, his smile warming his eyes. "Ready for an adventure?" Hannah nodded, returning his smile. She had brought a small bag with her slate and chalk, journal, and the food Mrs. Whitley had provided. Grant helped her mount, his hands steady at her waist. It had been months since Hannah had ridden, but her body remembered the proper posture and grip. As they set off through town, she found herself relaxing into the mare's easy gait. "Sadie's behaving well for you," Grant observed as they passed the last buildings of Silver Peak and headed toward the foothills. "She can be particular about her riders." Hannah patted the horse's neck appreciatively, enjoying the freedom of movement after months of walking everywhere in town. The landscape opened before them, sagebrush plains giving way to pinyon and juniper as they climbed, with snow-capped mountains rising in the distance. They rode mostly in comfortable silence, Grant occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing stories about the area. Hannah was content to absorb the rugged beauty around them, finding peace in the vast open spaces and clear blue sky. After about an hour, they entered a narrow canyon, following a small stream that bubbled over rocks. The trail climbed steadily, switchbacking up a steep slope. Pine trees grew more numerous, their scent sharp and clean in the cool air. "Almost there," Grant said as they rounded a final bend. "Just over this rise." They emerged into a hidden meadow ringed by pine trees with a clear spring bubbling from rocks at one end. Wildflowers dotted the grassy expanse despite the late season, and the view beyond showed the entire valley with Silver Peak nestled in the distance. Hannah caught her breath at the unexpected beauty of the place. Grant dismounted and came to help her down from Sadie. "What do you think?" he asked, watching her face. Hannah retrieved her slate from her bag and wrote quickly, "It's magnificent. How did you find it?" "By accident," Grant admitted, leading the horses to a grassy spot where they could graze. "I was tracking some rustled cattle my first year as sheriff. Never did find the cattle, but I found this place instead." Hannah walked to the center of the meadow, turning slowly to take in the panoramic view. She wrote, "Do many people know about it?" "No," Grant said, spreading a blanket on a flat rock near the spring. "Just me, and now you." The significance of his sharing this private sanctuary wasn't lost on Hannah. She joined him on the blanket, writing, "Thank you for bringing me here." Grant's expression was more serious than usual as he replied, "I've never brought anyone here before. It's where I come when I need to think, or remember who I am beyond the badge." Hannah understood. In the months she had known him, she had observed how Grant's responsibilities as sheriff often consumed him, how he was constantly interrupted during meals, approached with problems during his rare moments of leisure, expected to resolve every dispute in Silver Peak. "Your sanctuary," she wrote. "Yes," he agreed. "Everyone needs a place that's just theirs." He hesitated, then added, "But I wanted to share it with you." Hannah felt the weight of his words, the gift he was offering beyond just showing her a beautiful place. She wrote carefully, "I'm honored by your trust." Grant nodded, then reached into his saddlebag and produced a small wrapped package. "I have something for you. An early Christmas gift, I suppose, though that wasn't my intention." Surprised, Hannah accepted the package. It was rectangular and surprisingly heavy for its size. She unwrapped the brown paper carefully to reveal a beautiful wooden box with her initials HZ inlaid in lighter wood on the lid. "It's beautiful," she wrote, running her fingers over the smooth surface. "Open it," Grant encouraged. Hannah lifted the hinged lid to find the box contained a small slate framed in the same dark wood as the box, with several pieces of chalk in a fitted compartment and a soft cloth for erasing. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the slate itself of much higher quality than the simple school slate she had been using. "I noticed your slate getting worn," Grant explained, "and it seemed impersonal. This one is just for you." Tears welled in Hannah's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift. The worn slate she carried had been hastily purchased in Boston, a practical necessity rather than something chosen with care. This beautiful box and slate represented something different, an acceptance of her current needs without judgment, and at the same time, evidence of genuine care. She set aside her old slate and wrote on the new one her first message. "This is the most thoughtful gift I have ever received. Thank you." Grant's face relaxed at her reaction. "You're welcome. Thomas helped, he's a fine woodworker, but the design was my idea." Hannah ran her fingers over her initials again, touched by the personal detail. On impulse, she leaned forward and pressed a kiss to Grant's cheek, her heart pounding at her own boldness. Grant's eyes widened in surprise, then softened with pleasure. "I hoped you would like it," he said simply. They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, the meadow quiet around them except for the gentle sound of the spring and the occasional soft nicker from the horses. Hannah felt a rare sense of peace wash over her, not the vigilant calm she maintained in town, but a deeper tranquility. "Hannah," Grant said finally, his voice serious, "there's something I want to say, something I've been thinking about for a while now." She looked at him expectantly, her pulse quickening at his tone. "These past months, getting to know you, they've meant a great deal to me," he began, choosing his words with obvious care. "I find myself thinking about you when we're apart, looking forward to seeing you, wondering about your thoughts, your past, your dreams." Hannah held very still, hardly breathing. "I know there are things you haven't told me," Grant continued. "Things that hurt you, that stole your voice. I don't need to know them unless someday you want to share. But I do know who you are now: kind, intelligent, brave in ways most people never have to be." He took a deep breath. "What I'm trying to say, not very elegantly, is that I care for you, Hannah. Deeply. More than I've cared for anyone in a very long time. And if you might feel something similar, I would be honored if you would consider a future where we might see where these feelings lead us." Hannah stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. The declaration was everything she had begun to hope for, and simultaneously her greatest fear. To love again was to risk heartbreak, yes, but also to risk discovery of her shameful past. Grant waited patiently, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. This man who faced down armed desperados without flinching was laying his heart bare before her, asking nothing but honesty in return. With trembling hands, Hannah lifted her new slate and wrote, "I care for you too, more than I thought possible after everything, but I'm afraid." Of what? Grant asked gently. She hesitated, then wrote, of not being whole enough for you, of the past finding me. Of failing you when you deserve someone untouched by darkness. Grant reached out slowly, taking her hand. Hannah, look at me. She raised her eyes to his, seeing nothing but warmth and sincerity. Everyone carries darkness, he said quietly. I've seen things, done things during the war and after that haunt me still. We all have scars. What matters is that we keep trying, keep moving forward despite them. Hannah bit her lip, unconvinced. As for being whole enough, Grant continued, you are exactly enough, exactly as you are. With or without your voice, whether the past stays buried or comes to light, I'm not asking for perfection, Hannah. I'm just asking for a chance to walk beside you, whatever comes. Tears spilled down Hannah's cheeks at his words. With her free hand, she wrote unsteadily, you might regret that promise. I won't, Grant said with quiet certainty. I know my own mind, Hannah, and my own heart. The simplicity of his declaration undid her final resistance. Hannah set down her slate and moved closer, allowing Grant to draw her gently into his arms. She rested her head against his shoulder, feeling his steadiness, his warmth, his unwavering strength. They sat that way for long minutes, the sun warming them as it climbed higher in the sky. Hannah gradually relaxed into his embrace, her tears subsiding. When Grant finally spoke, his voice rumbled pleasantly under her ear. Does this mean you'll give us a chance? Hannah sat up slightly, reaching for her slate. She wrote with careful deliberation, yes, but we may need to move slowly. Grant's smile was radiant. We can move at whatever pace feels right to you. I meant what I said that first day, Hannah. I'll wait as long as you need. The reminder of their first meeting brought an answering smile to Hannah's face. She wrote, you've been waiting since the beginning. And it's been worth every minute, Grant assured her. The rest of the day passed in gentle conversation, shared confidences and comfortable silences. They ate the lunch Mrs. Whitley had packed, explored the meadow, and sat with their shoulders touching as Grant pointed out landmarks in the valley below. Hannah found herself relaxing more fully than she had in months, sharing stories from her childhood in Boston, her years at seminary school, her love of teaching. Grant listened attentively, asking questions that showed genuine interest, offering stories of his own in return. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Grant reluctantly suggested they should head back before darkness made the trail difficult. Hannah agreed, though part of her wished they could remain in this peaceful sanctuary indefinitely. The ride back to Silver Peak was quiet, both of them absorbed in their own thoughts. As the town came into view, Hannah felt a momentary panic. In the isolation of the meadow, declaring her feelings had seemed natural. Now, facing the reality of town life, doubts crept back in. Grant seemed to sense her unease. As they reached the outskirts of town, he reined his horse closer to hers. Nothing has to change right away, he said quietly. We can keep this between us for as long as you wish. Hannah nodded gratefully, writing on her slate, not because I'm ashamed, I just need time. I understand, Grant assured her. This is ours, Hannah. No one else needs to know until we decide. The knowledge that Grant understood her need for privacy without taking offense eased Hannah's anxiety. By the time they reached the boarding house, her equilibrium had mostly returned. Grant helped her dismount, his hands lingering slightly at her waist. Thank you for coming with me today, he said, his voice low. Hannah wrote quickly, thank you for sharing your special place and for everything else. I'll see you tomorrow, Grant asked. Perhaps after church, Hannah nodded, reluctant to part despite her earlier concerns. On impulse, she stepped forward and embraced him briefly, then hurried inside before her courage failed her. Mrs. Whitley was in the parlor when Hannah entered, pretending to read though her knowing smile suggested she had been watching for Hannah's return. "Have a nice ride, dear?" she asked innocently. Hannah nodded, her cheeks warm. "The sheriff seemed in particularly good spirits when he dropped you off," Mrs. Whitley continued, her eyes twinkling. Hannah merely smiled, unwilling to confirm the landlady's obvious suspicions. She wrote quickly, "I'm rather tired. I think I'll rest before dinner." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Whitley replied, though her expression said she wasn't fooled in the slightest. "Rest well." In her room, Hannah sat on her bed, still processing the day's events. She opened her journal, trying to capture the complex emotions swirling within her: joy at Grant's declaration, fear of the unknown future, hope that perhaps she might find happiness despite everything. As she wrote, a sense of peace gradually settled over her. Whatever came next, she was no longer facing it alone. Grant Abernathy had offered not just his heart, but his patience and understanding, gifts beyond price to a woman who had lost her voice and nearly her hope. For the first time since the attack, Hannah allowed herself to imagine a future filled with possibility rather than fear. Winter descended on Silver Peak, with snow flurries and biting winds that howled down from the mountains. Hannah's classroom was kept warm by a pot-bellied stove that her older students took turns feeding with wood. But the short walk between the school and boarding house often left her chilled to the bone. Grant began meeting her after school most days, escorting her home with the excuse that the weather made the walks treacherous. Hannah knew the townspeople were beginning to notice the sheriff's attentions, but true to his word, Grant made no public declaration of their changing relationship. In private moments, walks by the frozen creek, evenings by Mrs. Whitley's parlor fire when other boarders had retired, their connection deepened. Grant never pressed for more than Hannah was ready to give. He seemed content with simple hand-holding, occasional embraces, and once, a brief, gentle kiss that left Hannah both trembling and wishing for more. December brought Christmas preparations and excitement to Silver Peak. Hannah's students rehearsed a pageant. The stores displayed special merchandise ordered from San Francisco, and Mrs. Whitley decorated the boarding house with evergreen boughs and red ribbons. A week before Christmas, Hannah stayed late at school, preparing special gifts for her students' hand-bound collections of poems and stories she had copied out for each child according to their reading level. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice the early winter darkness until she had finished the last book. Hastily gathering her things, Hannah wrapped her heaviest shawl around her shoulders and hurried out into the cold evening. Snow had been falling steadily all afternoon, already several inches deep on the boardwalks. The wind had picked up, driving icy particles against her face as she made her way down the deserted street. The familiar panic began rising in her chest, the fear of being alone, exposed, vulnerable. Hannah quickened her pace, her boots slipping on the snow-covered boards. As she rounded the corner near the general store, she collided hard with someone emerging from the alley. Strong hands steadied her before she could fall. "Whoa there, pretty lady," said a male voice she didn't recognize. "What's your hurry on such a cold night?" Hannah looked up into the face of a stranger, unshaven, red-cheeked from cold or whiskey. His eyes narrowed against the blowing snow. She took a step back, her heart hammering painfully. "Cat got your tongue?" the man asked with a grin that showed tobacco-stained teeth. "Don't be scared, darling, just being friendly." Hannah shook her head, trying to step around him. The man moved to block her path. "Aw, don't run off. It's too cold to be walking alone. Let me keep you company." He reached for her arm. The familiar paralysis gripped Hannah, the same helpless terror that had claimed her in that Boston alley. Her throat closed completely, not even a whimper escaping as the man's fingers closed around her wrist. "That's enough, Decker." The commanding voice cut through Hannah's panic like a lifeline. Grant emerged from the swirling snow, his expression hard as granite. "Let go of the lady." The man Decker released Hannah's arm immediately, taking a step back. "No harm meant, Sheriff. Just offering the lady some company in this weather." "Miss Zimmer doesn't want your company," Grant said coldly. "And I believe the silver nugget is missing its dishwasher." Decker's surly expression suggested he wanted to argue, but one look at Grant's face changed his mind. "Just trying to be friendly," he muttered, slouching back toward the saloon. Grant watched him go, then turned to Hannah, his hard expression immediately softening to concern. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" Hannah shook her head, still trembling from the encounter. She reached for her slate, but her hands shook too badly to write. "Come on," Grant said gently, wrapping a protective arm around her shoulders. "Let's get you somewhere warm." Instead of heading toward the boarding house, he guided her to the sheriff's office a few doors down. Inside, a fire blazed in the small stove, dispelling the worst of the chill. "Sit here," Grant said, leading her to a chair near the stove. "I'll make some coffee." Hannah sat, gradually feeling warmth return to her frozen fingers. The sheriff's office was simple but orderly, a desk stacked with wanted posters and paperwork. A gun rack, a small iron-barred cell in the back corner currently empty, and a cot along one wall where Grant presumably slept when duties kept him late. Grant moved with practiced efficiency, measuring coffee grounds into a pot and setting it on the stove to boil. Only when he had poured the steaming brew into 2 tin cups did he pull up a chair across from Hannah. "Better now?" he asked, handing her a cup. Hannah nodded, wrapping her fingers gratefully around the warm metal. She had recovered enough to write on her slate. "Thank you, I'm sorry about that." Grant frowned. "You have nothing to apologize for. Decker's new in town, working at the Silver Nugget. He's already been warned about bothering the women in town." Hannah sipped her coffee, trying to calm her still racing heart. She wrote, "It wasn't just him. Being alone in the dark." She couldn't finish the sentence, but understanding dawned in Grant's eyes. "It reminded you of whatever happened before," he said quietly. Hannah nodded, fighting back tears. Grant reached across the space between them, taking her hand. "You're safe now, Hannah." The simple declaration broke something inside her. Tears spilled down her cheeks as months of carefully maintained control crumbled. Grant moved his chair closer, drawing her gently against his chest as she wept. "It's all right," he murmured, stroking her hair. "Let it out, I've got you." Hannah cried until her tears were spent, soaking the front of Grant's shirt. When she finally pulled back, embarrassment replacing the storm of emotion, Grant simply handed her a clean handkerchief. "Feel better?" he asked without a trace of judgment. Hannah nodded, dabbing at her swollen eyes. She wrote shakily, "I'm sorry. I don't usually fall apart like that." "Don't apologize for having feelings," Grant said firmly. "We all break sometimes, Hannah. The trick is finding people who help put us back together." His words, so simple yet profound, touched something deep within her. Hannah looked up at this man who had shown her nothing but patience and kindness since the day they met, and something shifted in her heart. She picked up her slate again and wrote with deliberate care. "It happened in Boston. 3 men attacked me in an alley as I was walking home from giving a piano lesson. They hurt me. I screamed and screamed until my voice gave out. By the time help came, I couldn't speak anymore. The doctors called it hysterical aphonia." Grant read her words, his expression darkening with controlled anger, but he remained silent, waiting. "They were never caught," Hannah continued writing. "My father wanted me to stay home, recover quietly. But the whispers started about what else the men might have done, about why I couldn't speak, about how damaged I was. Even my sister couldn't look at me without pity or frustration. So when my father's business associate mentioned Silver Peak needed a teacher, I begged to come. And here you are, Grant said softly, stronger than you know. Hannah shook her head, writing, not strong, just running. Coming to a strange town thousands of miles from home, starting over alone, facing your fears every day, that's strength, Hannah, Grant insisted. Don't diminish what you've accomplished. Hannah had never considered her choices in that light. She had seen only her weakness, her inability to speak, her flight from painful memories. Grant's perspective offered a new way of viewing her journey. Thank you for seeing me that way, she wrote. For waiting when I couldn't speak, for understanding when I couldn't explain. Always, Grant promised, squeezing her hand, for as long as you need. In that moment, something crystallized in Hannah's heart, certainty pushing through the tangle of fear and doubt. She set down her slate, leaned forward, and pressed her lips to Grant's in a kiss that conveyed what words written or spoken could not. Grant responded with gentle restraint, his hands coming up to cradle her face with exquisite tenderness. When they finally parted, his eyes were bright with emotion. Hannah, he breathed, her name a benediction. She picked up her slate again, writing words she had been holding back for weeks. I love you. Grant's face transformed with joy. And I love you, Hannah Zimmer, with all my heart. The simple exchange in the warm sheriff's office while snow fell steadily outside marked a turning point. Hannah had shared her darkest secret, and Grant had received it without horror or pity, offering instead understanding and unwavering support. For the first time since the attack, Hannah felt truly seen, not as a victim or a curiosity, but as a whole person worthy of love. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. They sat together by the stove until the storm abated, talking about everything and nothing, Grant sharing stories from his early days as sheriff, Hannah writing about her dreams of traveling to Europe someday, both of them discussing books they had loved and places they hoped to see. When Grant finally escorted her back to the boarding house, the night was clear and cold, stars brilliant overhead. At the door, he kissed her once more, a promise and a benediction. Merry Christmas, Hannah, he said softly. Thank you for your trust. It's the greatest gift I could receive. Hannah smiled, writing on her slate before entering, the greatest gift is finding someone worth trusting. Merry Christmas, Grant. As she prepared for bed that night, Hannah realized something remarkable. For the first time in months, she had gone hours without fear shadowing her thoughts. Grant's steady presence had somehow created a space where safety felt possible again. It wasn't a permanent cure. The encounter with Decker had proven her vulnerabilities remained. But it was progress, a step toward the person she wanted to be again. Brave, open, capable of joy. Hannah fell asleep with hope warming her heart, the memory of Grant's lips on hers a talisman against the darkness. Christmas in Silver Peak brought a brief cessation of winter's harshness, with clear skies and enough sunshine to melt the worst of the snow in town, though the surrounding mountains remained white-capped and majestic. The school pageant went smoothly, Hannah's students performing their memorized pieces with only minor mishaps, to the delight of proud parents. On Christmas Eve, a community celebration was held at the church, with carols, scripture readings, and a special sermon from Reverend Thompson about hope in dark times that seemed particularly meaningful to Hannah. Grant sat beside her during the service, their shoulders touching, his presence a steady comfort. Afterward, they joined the crowd at the town hall for refreshments. Hannah noticed that while Grant maintained a respectful public demeanor, he stayed close to her side throughout the evening, his attentive behavior drawing speculative glances from several townspeople. Sheriff seems mighty attentive to the schoolteacher, Hannah overheard Mrs. Peterson comment to Mrs. Whitley. "About time, if you ask me," Mrs. Whitley replied with satisfaction. "Silver Peak needs a properly settled sheriff, and Miss Zimmer could use someone steady in her life." Hannah blushed at the women's matchmaking, but found she didn't mind their assumptions. The secret she and Grant shared, the deepening bond between them, felt precious rather than something to hide. Christmas Day brought a small gathering at the boarding house, with Mrs. Whitley serving a magnificent dinner to her boarders and several guests, including Grant. Gifts were exchanged: handkerchiefs embroidered by Hannah for the elderly sisters, a new pipe for Mr. Collins the clerk, a knitted scarf for Mrs. Whitley. Grant presented Hannah with a small package wrapped in silver paper. Inside was a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a meadow flower, similar to those that had bloomed in their special place. "To remember that day," he said quietly, as Hannah admired the beautiful workmanship. She had given him a journal bound in soft leather, with a note inside that read, "For your thoughts when you're in our meadow, so I can share them even when I'm not there." The simple gifts, chosen with such care, meant more than elaborate presents ever could. Hannah wore the silver flower on a ribbon around her neck, touching it often throughout the day, a tangible reminder of Grant's understanding and affection. As winter deepened through January, their relationship settled into comfortable patterns. Grant now openly escorted Hannah to church and community events, though they still kept their more intimate moments private. Silver Peak society, practical as always, seemed to accept their courtship without much fuss. A sheriff and a schoolteacher made a sensible match by frontier standards. Hannah's teaching flourished as she developed new methods for communicating with her students. The children had adapted completely to her written instructions, and some of the older ones had even begun learning simple hand signs Hannah created to facilitate quicker communication during lessons. One frigid February morning, Hannah was surprised by a knock at her classroom door an hour after school had begun. Opening it, she found a breathless young boy she recognized as one of the livery stable's helpers. "Miss Zimmer," he panted, "Sheriff says to come quick. There's been an accident at the mine. Men trapped. He needs you to help with the children." Hannah's heart raced with alarm, but she kept her expression calm for her students' sake. She wrote quickly on the board, instructing the oldest boy, James, to lead the class in arithmetic exercises while she stepped out. Outside the classroom, she scribbled on her slate, "What happened?" "Cave in at the Silver Strike mine," the boy explained. "Happened early this morning. About 10 men trapped inside, including the Walker brothers and Mr. Jensen. Their wives and children are all gathered at the mine entrance. Sheriff's organizing rescue efforts, but he's worried about the little ones in the cold. Asked if you could help keep them warm and occupied at the assayer's office nearby." Hannah nodded immediately, hurrying back into the classroom. She wrote instructions on the board, dismissing the students whose parents weren't minors, and gathering the remaining children to accompany her to the mine. 6 students remained, all with fathers or older brothers who worked in the silver mines that sustained Silver Peak's economy. The scene at the mine entrance was controlled chaos. Men moved with urgent purpose, carrying timber supports and tools. Women clustered together, faces tight with worry, some with small children clinging to their skirts. Over everything hung a palpable tension, the unspoken knowledge that time was the enemy for men trapped in the dark bowels of the earth. Hannah spotted Grant immediately, his tall figure distinctive as he conferred with the mine foreman. His face was grimy and tense, but it lightened fractionally when he saw her approaching with the school-aged children. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said, touching her arm briefly. "The assayer's office is set up for the children." It would help immensely if you could keep them there away from. He gestured toward the mine entrance where men were disappearing into the dark opening. Hannah nodded, writing, "I'll take care of them. Be careful." "Always," Grant promised, though they both knew rescue work was inherently dangerous. "I'll send word when there's news." Hannah gathered not just her students but the younger children as well, guiding them to the assayer's office where a stove had been stoked to glowing heat. With quiet efficiency, she organized activity stories for the youngest, simple mathematics competitions for the older ones, drawing materials for those in between. Throughout the long day, Hannah maintained a calm exterior despite her growing concern. Periodically, one of the rescue workers would bring updates. Progress was slow. The trapped men had been located, but reaching them required careful shoring up of unstable tunnels. As evening approached, Hannah helped serve a simple meal provided by townswomen who weren't directly affected by the accident. The children were growing restless and anxious, sensing the adults' tension despite Hannah's best efforts to distract them. Just after sunset, the door burst open, bringing a blast of cold air, and Grant, his face streaked with dirt and sweat, his expression weary but triumphant. "We reached them," he announced to the room. "All alive, though Jensen and Walker have injuries. We're bringing them up now." The room erupted in cries of relief and joy. Women who had been maintaining brittle composure dissolved into tears. Children jumped up and down with excitement, and Hannah felt her own eyes fill with grateful tears. The next hour passed in blur as the rescued miners were reunited with their families. Two were indeed injured: Jensen with a broken leg, Walker with several cracked ribs, but miraculously, all had survived the cave-in. They were transported to the doctor's house for treatment, while the uninjured men were surrounded by relieved relatives. Throughout the celebrations, Hannah noticed Grant moving tirelessly, ensuring the injured were cared for, speaking with the mine owner about safety improvements, comforting a young miner who was experiencing obvious shock. Only when everything was settled did he approach Hannah, who was gathering the last of the children's drawings and books. "You were wonderful today," he said quietly, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Having the children safe and occupied made everything easier." Hannah smiled tiredly, writing, "You're the hero today. I've never seen anyone work so hard." Grant shook his head dismissively. "Just doing my job. Everyone pitched in." "That's not what I heard," Hannah wrote. "They say you were the first one in, last one out." "People exaggerate," Grant said, though he looked pleased at her recognition. Hannah studied his exhausted face, noting the new lines around his eyes and the way he held himself stiffly, suggesting sore muscles or perhaps minor injuries he was concealing. "You need rest," she wrote firmly. "And food." "I should check on Jensen and Walker first," Grant protested. Hannah shook her head, writing, "Dr. Thompson will send word if needed. Come to the boarding house. Mrs. Whitley has kept supper warm." Too tired to argue further, Grant nodded agreement. They walked through the cold night toward the boarding house, Grant moving more slowly than usual, confirming Hannah's suspicion that he had pushed himself beyond reasonable limits during the rescue. "Mrs. Whitley exclaimed over Grant's condition when they arrived, ushering him to the kitchen where she served them both generous portions of beef stew and fresh bread. She pointedly withdrew afterward, leaving them alone at the kitchen table. As Grant ate with the single-minded focus of a truly hungry man, Hannah studied him with growing concern. Beyond the physical exhaustion, she sensed an emotional toll. When he finally pushed his empty bowl away with a sigh, she wrote, "What aren't you telling me?" Grant looked surprised, then rueful. "You're getting too good at reading me. Tell me," Hannah insisted. "It was close, Hannah," he admitted, his voice low. "Too close. The secondary collapse nearly caught us during the rescue, another few feet. He trailed off, shaking his head. I keep thinking about those men's families. What if we hadn't reached them in time? But you did, Hannah wrote. You saved them. This time, Grant said soberly. Mining's dangerous work, though, always will be. Hannah sensed there was more troubling him. She waited, giving him space to continue if he wished. After a long moment, Grant spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. It was dark in there, so dark you couldn't see your hand in front of your face without a lantern, and I kept thinking, is this what it's like for you? That kind of darkness, closing in, no way out. His insight stunned Hannah. No one, not even the doctors in Boston, had tried to understand what her silent prison felt like from the inside. Yet Grant, exhausted and injured, had found space to consider her experience while fighting to save men's lives. Tears blurred Hannah's vision as she wrote. Sometimes. But then someone comes with a light. Someone patient enough to wait until I find my way out. Grant reached across the table, taking her hand in his grimy one. I meant what I said before, Hannah. I'll wait as long as needed. But today reminded me how fragile life is, how quickly everything can change. Hannah nodded, understanding completely. The mine accident had shaken everyone in Silver Peak, reminding them of frontier life's inherent precariousness. What are you saying? She wrote, her hand trembling slightly. Grant took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. I'm saying that I don't want to waste precious time. I'm saying that I love you, Hannah Zimmer, and if you'll have me, I want to marry you. The proposal, though not entirely unexpected given the deepening of their relationship, still took Hannah's breath away. She stared at Grant. Seeing past the grime and exhaustion to the steady, honorable man, she had come to love a man who had never pushed her to speak, who had waited patiently through her silence, who had seen strength in her when she saw only brokenness. She picked up her chalk, her hand now steady as she wrote. Yes. The single word transformed Grant's weary face. Yes, he repeated, as if needing confirmation. Hannah nodded, smiling through her tears. Grant stood, pulling her gently to her feet and into his arms. Despite his dirty clothes and exhausted state, the embrace felt like coming home. When he kissed her, Hannah thought she might finally understand what people meant by heaven on earth. I don't have a ring yet, Grant admitted when they finally parted. This wasn't exactly how I planned to ask. Hannah shook her head, dismissing the concern. She wrote quickly, the asking was perfect, because it was you. Grant's smile was luminous despite his fatigue. We should wait to announce it until I've spoken with Reverend Thompson, and I should write to your father, ask properly. Hannah touched his cheek, halting the tired flow of words. She wrote, tomorrow is soon enough for all that, you need sleep. You're right, as usual, Grant conceded. He kissed her once more, gently. Good night, my love, dream of our future. As Hannah watched him walk somewhat unsteadily back to his quarters at the sheriff's office, she felt a curious lightness, despite the day's drama. The mine accident had reminded everyone in Silver Peak of life's fragility, but it had also crystallized what truly mattered. Connections, community, love. Grant had asked her to dream of their future. For the first time since the attack, Hannah found she could imagine one without fear shadowing every corner. News of their engagement spread through Silver Peak with the speed only a small town can achieve. By noon the following day, Hannah had received congratulations from every student, most parents, and what felt like half the town. Mrs. Whitley was beside herself with joy, declaring she had known from the start that Hannah and Grant were perfectly suited. Grant, somewhat recovered from his rescue exertions, appeared at the schoolhouse during lunch break, looking simultaneously embarrassed and pleased by the town's reaction. I hope you don't mind the fuss, he said, as Hannah's students watched with undisguised interest from the schoolyard. News travels fast here. Hannah smiled, writing, I don't mind, though I wonder who told everyone. Mrs. Whitley, of course, Grant chuckled. She cornered Reverend Thompson at the general store this morning discussing wedding preparations before I'd even spoken to him officially. Hannah laughed silently, not surprised in the slightest. The motherly landlady had been dropping increasingly unsubtle hints about marriage for weeks. And what did Reverend Thompson say? She wrote, that he would be honored to perform the ceremony whenever we're ready, Grant replied. Though he did suggest spring might be more pleasant than winter. Hannah nodded agreement, writing, April perhaps, when the meadow might have flowers. Grant's eyes softened at her suggestion. Our meadow. Yes, that would be perfect. The thought of being married in that special place, with Silver Peak spread below and the sky vast above, felt exactly right to Hannah. A private moment made public, a shared sanctuary becoming the foundation of their new life together. I should write to my father, Hannah noted. Though I doubt he'll travel all this way. I've already written asking for his blessing, Grant admitted. Sent it with yesterday's eastbound stage. I hope you don't mind the presumption. Hannah shook her head, touched by his adherence to tradition despite the circumstances. She wrote, he'll give it. He's always wanted my happiness, even if he didn't always understand what that meant. The school bell rang, signaling the end of lunch break. Grant tipped his hat to her as the children began filing back inside. Duty calls for both of us. Dinner at the hotel restaurant tonight. To celebrate properly. Hannah nodded, her heart full as she watched him stride away toward the sheriff's office. The children's knowing giggles as they re-entered the classroom made her blush, but she couldn't bring herself to mind their innocent teasing. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Hannah felt unalloyed happiness. The rest of February passed in a blur of ordinary days made extraordinary by their engagement. Grant was often busy with his duties, particularly after the mine accident prompted new safety regulations that required enforcement. Hannah's teaching consumed her days, and in the evenings, she began planning for their shared future. Mrs. Whitley helped her start a hope chest, contributing linens and offering advice about household management. The elderly sisters who owned the millinery presented Hannah with a beautiful wedding bonnet, promising a matching dress when spring fabrics arrived. March brought the first hints of warmer weather, with patches of ground emerging from beneath the snow and longer daylight hours that lifted everyone's spirits. Hannah found herself watching the meadow flowers near town with keen interest, gauging when their higher altitude sanctuary might bloom. A letter arrived from Hannah's father midway through March, containing his blessing along with a generous bank draft as a wedding gift. The formal language couldn't quite hide genuine pleasure that his daughter had found happiness in her new home. He regretted that business would prevent his traveling to Nevada for the ceremony, but promised a proper gift would follow. Reading between the lines, Hannah suspected her father was relieved that she had moved forward with her life in a respectable manner. His greatest fear after the attack had been that Hannah would remain forever isolated by her condition, unable to secure a husband or place in society. That she had found both in Silver Peak seemed to satisfy his concern for her future security. As their wedding date approached, Hannah found herself thinking more about her lost voice. She had adapted remarkably well to written communication, with most of Silver Peak now accustomed to her slate and chalk. But the traditional wedding vows required spoken responses. How would she promise herself to Grant in silence? Reverend Thompson resolved her concern with characteristic practicality when she raised the issue during wedding preparations. The Lord hears what's in our hearts, Miss Zimmer, not just what passes our lips, he assured her. You may write your responses or simply nod. The commitment is what matters, not the form it takes. His understanding eased Hannah's mind considerably. Still, as April approached with the meadow beginning to show green, she found herself wishing she could speak her love aloud on their special day. Not for the ceremony's validity, but as a gift to grant the man who had waited so patiently through her silence. A week before the wedding, Hannah visited Dr. Thompson with a persistent cough that had developed after a rainy walk home from school. The doctor, a gruff but kind man in his 60s, examined her thoroughly before pronouncing it a simple cold. Rest your chest and throat, he advised. Plenty of hot tea with honey. No strenuous activity until after the wedding, young lady. We can't have you falling ill on your special day. As Hannah gathered her things to leave, Dr. Thompson hesitated, then said, Miss Zimmer, I hope you don't mind my asking, but has anyone in Boston or here attempted therapeutic approaches for your aphonia? Hannah shook her head, writing, The Boston doctors called it hysteria and recommended institutional treatment. My father refused. Quite right, too, Dr. Thompson harumphed. Barbaric approach, but there are other methods, gentler ones. Exercises to strengthen the vocal cords, techniques to overcome the mental barriers. Hannah stared at him, surprised by this unexpected topic. She wrote, You believe my voice could return. I've seen similar cases during the war, the doctor said. Soldiers who witnessed horrors sometimes lost the ability to speak. Some recovered in time with proper support. Hannah felt a flutter of hope she hadn't allowed herself in months. She wrote quickly, What kind of exercises? Simple ones to start, Dr. Thompson explained. Humming, controlled breathing, gentle attempts at vocalization when you're alone and feeling safe. The mind creates these barriers for protection, but they can be dismantled gradually without force. Hannah absorbed this information with growing excitement. She wrote, I would like to try. Good, the doctor approved. But remember, no pressure, no deadlines. The voice returns in its own time, if at all. Acceptance of your current state is essential for healing. Hannah nodded, understanding. The doctor's approach was refreshingly different from the Boston specialists who had treated her condition as a weakness to be overcome through harsh methods or institutional control. Thank you, she wrote sincerely. You're marrying a good man, Miss Zimmer, Dr. Thompson said as she prepared to leave. Sheriff Abernathy is one of the finest people in Silver Peak. Voice or no voice, you're making a worthy match. Hannah smiled her agreement, leaving the doctor's office with renewed hope and a list of simple exercises to try. That evening, alone in her room, Hannah attempted the first technique, gentle humming while focusing on the vibration in her throat. The sound emerged weak and thready, but it was sound nonetheless, the first she had voluntarily produced in nearly a year. Tears streamed down her face at this small victory. She didn't expect miracles or quick cures, but the doctor's practical approach had given her something the Boston physicians never had: agency in her own healing. Whether or not she regained her voice in time for the wedding became less important than the journey itself. She would continue trying at her own pace, without pressure. Grant would wait, as he always had, not demanding speech, but welcoming it if it came. The week before the wedding passed in a whirl of final preparations. Mary arrived from Carson City with her husband Thomas, bringing the wooden cradle Thomas had crafted as a wedding gift, a gesture that made Hannah blush, but secretly pleased her with its assumption of future children. April 18th dawned clear and mild, with a gentle breeze stirring the new leaves and wildflowers beginning to dot the hillsides. The wedding party, small by Eastern standards, but including nearly everyone in Silver Peak, gathered at the base of the trail leading to the meadow. those who could ride mounted horses borrowed from every stable in town. Others climbed into wagons that Grant had arranged to navigate the steeper portions of the trail. Hannah rode beside Mary in the lead wagon, her wedding dress a simple creation of ivory silk with lace accents protected by a light shawl against trail dust. "Grant hasn't stopped smiling for days," Mary confided as they ascended the winding path. "I've never seen my brother so happy." Hannah smiled, her heart too full for even written words. She had continued Dr. Thompson's exercises faithfully, making small progress sounds, whispers, brief phonations when alone. But speech still eluded her in moments of emotion or in others' presence. The meadow, when they reached it, exceeded Hannah's hopes. Early wildflowers carpeted the grassy expanse in purple, yellow, and white. The spring that formed a small pool at one end reflected the deep blue sky, and the view of Silver Peak below was crystal clear in the morning light. Grant waited beside Reverend Thompson near the spring, looking more handsome than Hannah had ever seen him in a new black suit, his beard neatly trimmed, his hair freshly cut. The expression on his face as Hannah walked toward him on Judge Parker's arm, standing in for her absent father, was one of such naked adoration that tears blurred her vision. The ceremony itself was simple but deeply meaningful. Reverend Thompson spoke of commitment, partnership, and faith. Grant's voice was steady as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Hannah for all his days. When it came time for Hannah's responses, she had planned to nod and squeeze Grant's hands to signify her acceptance of each vow. But standing before this man who had seen past her silence to the person beneath, surrounded by a community that had accepted her exactly as she was, Hannah felt something shift deep within her. "Do you, Hannah Zimmer, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Reverend Thompson asked. "To love, honor, and cherish him in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death parts you." Hannah looked into Grant's beloved face, saw the absolute acceptance in his eyes, and felt the barriers within her mind begin to crumble. She opened her mouth, uncertain what would emerge. "I do." The words came out as barely more than a whisper, rusty from disuse, but audible in the hushed meadow. Grant's eyes widened in shock, then filled with tears. A collective gasp rose from the assembled guests, followed by complete silence as everyone held their breath. Hannah swallowed hard, then spoke again, her voice slightly stronger. "I do love you, Grant Abernathy." Grant's hands tightened around hers, his face transformed by joy. "Hannah," he breathed, her name a prayer on his lips. Reverend Thompson, recovering from his own surprise, continued the ceremony with visible emotion. When he pronounced them man and wife, Grant gathered Hannah into his arms with exquisite gentleness, as if she might break or disappear. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "So much." "I love you too," Hannah responded, the words still halting but growing more certain. Their kiss was both a sealing of their vows and a celebration of unexpected miracles, a promise fulfilled, and a new beginning crystallized in one perfect moment. The celebration afterward was jubilant, with the wedding party returning to town for a feast at the hotel. Hannah spoke little, her newly recovered voice tiring easily, but the few words she managed were greeted with joy by their friends and neighbors. Dr. Thompson, watching her with professional satisfaction, warned both Hannah and the well-wishers not to expect too much too soon. "The voice is like any muscle," he explained. "It needs to be strengthened gradually. Mrs. Abernathy should rest it frequently and not strain for words that don't come easily yet." Grant was visibly protective, ensuring Hannah wasn't overwhelmed by excited guests eager to hear her speak. when he noticed her growing fatigue as the celebration continued. He smoothly announced that they would be departing for their brief honeymoon, 3 days at a lakeside cabin borrowed from a friend of Judge Parker's. As they rode out of town in a borrowed buggy, townsfolk cheering and throwing flower petals, Hannah leaned against Grant's solid shoulder, contented beyond words spoken or unspoken. "Was it too much?" Grant asked quietly as Silver Peak disappeared behind them. "The celebration, I mean." Hannah shook her head. "Perfect," she managed, still finding multisyllabic words challenging. Grant smiled, keeping one hand on the reins while wrapping his other arm around her shoulders. "I still can't believe it, Hannah. Your voice. It's the most beautiful sound I've ever heard." Hannah smiled up at him. "Your patience," she said slowly, "made it possible." "I meant what I said that first day," Grant reminded her. "I would have waited as long as you needed, forever if necessary." "I know," Hannah whispered, resting her head against his chest. "That's why I could finally speak." The simple truth resonated between them as they continued toward the lake. Grant's unwavering acceptance had created the safety Hannah needed to find her voice again. Not demands or pressure or medical interventions, but simply the knowledge that she was loved exactly as she was, silent or speaking. As twilight painted the western sky in shades of rose and gold, Hannah marveled at how far she had come from that terrified, mute young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Silver Peak 8 months ago. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had led her here to love, to healing, to a future brighter than any she could have imagined in those dark days after the attack. "What are you thinking?" Grant asked, noting her contemplative expression. Hannah smiled, choosing her words carefully to conserve her still fragile voice. "That some silences lead to the most important words." Grant's answering smile was tender as he guided the buggy around a bend in the road, revealing the sparkling lake ahead, the first glimpse of their honeymoon destination, and beyond that, their shared future. "I couldn't agree more, Mrs. Abernathy," he said softly. "I couldn't agree more." Epilogue. 5 years later, the laughter of children echoed across the meadow as 4-year-old Joseph Abernathy chased butterflies through the summer wildflowers, his dark curls bouncing with each exuberant step. Nearby, Hannah sat on a sun-warmed rock, cradling 2-month-old Elizabeth against her shoulder while keeping a watchful eye on her energetic son. "Not too close to the edge, Joseph," she called, her voice clear and strong in the mountain air. "I know, Mama," the boy responded with the slightly aggrieved tone of children everywhere who believe their parents worry unnecessarily. Hannah smiled, stroking her daughter's downy head. Her voice had returned fully by the end of their first year of marriage, though it still occasionally grew husky when she was tired or emotional. Dr. Thompson had declared her recovery remarkable, but not unprecedented further evidence, he claimed, of the mind's capacity to heal itself when given proper support and time. The sound of hoofbeats announced Grant's arrival before he appeared over the rise, his horse picking its way carefully along the familiar trail. Even after 5 years as sheriff, Grant still cut an impressive figure on horseback, tall, broad-shouldered, his face weathered by sun and responsibility, but his eyes as kind as the day Hannah had first met him. "Papa," Joseph shouted, abandoning his butterfly chase to race toward his father. Grant dismounted in one fluid motion, catching his son mid-leap and swinging him high. "There's my boy. Have you been helping your mama with the baby?" "I showed Lizzie all the flowers," Joseph announced proudly. "And I didn't pick any because you said they should grow where God planted them." "That's right," Grant approved, setting the boy down and approaching Hannah with a warm smile. "And how are my girls doing? Lizzie just finished nursing," Hannah replied, accepting his kiss. "She'll probably sleep now if you want to hold her." Grant sat beside them, carefully taking his daughter into his arms. Elizabeth yawned, her tiny fingers curling against her father's work-worn hand in a contrast that never failed to move Hannah deeply. "Everything settled in town?" Hannah asked, knowing Grant had been dealing with a dispute between two minors over claim boundaries. "Finally," Grant confirmed. "Judge Parker helped negotiate a compromise. Sometimes I think his wisdom saves me more work than my badge ever does." Hannah smiled, leaning against his shoulder as they watched Joseph return to his explorations of the meadow. The years had brought changes to Silver Peak. A second mining company had opened operations, bringing new families and prosperity. The town now boasted 2 proper restaurants, a dressmaker's shop, and even a small theater for traveling shows. Through it all, their meadow had remained unchanged, still the sanctuary Grant had first shared with Hannah, now a special place for their growing family. They visited whenever they could escape their busy lives, introducing Joseph to its wonders as soon as he could ride in front of his father on horseback, and now bringing Elizabeth for her first summer visit. "I received a letter from Rebecca yesterday," Hannah mentioned, referring to her younger sister who had finally visited from Boston the previous year. "She's engaged to that banker she mentioned." "Good for her," Grant said sincerely. "She seemed much happier than when you first reconciled." The reconciliation with her sister had been another milestone in Hannah's healing journey. After years of strained correspondence, Rebecca had finally accepted Hannah's invitation to visit Silver Peak. The sophisticated Bostonian had been skeptical of frontier life at first, but witnessing her sister's happiness and hearing the full story of how Hannah had regained her voice had bridged much of the distance between them. "She mentioned father's health is declining," Hannah added more soberly. "I wonder if we should consider visiting Boston next spring." Grant nodded thoughtfully. "If that's what you want, we'll make it happen. Joseph is old enough to travel now, and Lizzie will be by then." The easy acceptance of her wishes, without questioning or suggesting complications, was typical of Grant's approach to their marriage, a partnership built on mutual support and respect that had only deepened over the years. "Joseph," Hannah called, "come have some lemonade before it gets warm." The boy raced back, flopping dramatically on the blanket they had spread beneath a large pine tree. Grant poured lemonade from a ceramic jug into tin cups while Hannah arranged the picnic Mrs. Whitley had packed for them. "Tell me a story, Papa," Joseph requested between gulps of lemonade. "About when you and Mama met." Grant's eyes met Hannah's over their son's head, sharing a private smile at the familiar request. Joseph never tired of hearing romanticized versions of their courtship, especially the part where his mother couldn't speak and his father promised to wait. "Well," Grant began, settling Elizabeth more comfortably in one arm. "It was a fall day much like this one, and a stagecoach arrived in Silver Peak carrying the most beautiful woman I had ever seen." As Grant spun the tale for their son, embellishing certain parts and tactfully omitting others, Hannah watched her family with a full heart. The girl who had fled Boston in terrified silence could never have imagined this future: a loving husband, 2 beautiful children, a community that valued her contributions, and a voice recovered through patience and unconditional acceptance. "And then," Grant continued, reaching the story's most important moment, "I told your mother to take all the time she needed, that I would wait as long as necessary." "Because you loved her already," Joseph interjected with the certainty of a child who had heard the story many times. "I think I did," Grant agreed, his eyes finding Hannah's again, "though I didn't know it yet. And Mama's voice came back when you got married," Joseph concluded triumphantly, Because love is the strongest medicine. Hannah laughed softly. That's right, sweetheart. Sometimes the heart knows how to heal what the mind cannot. As the afternoon lengthened into evening, they packed up their picnic and prepared to return to town. Grant settled Elizabeth in a special carrier he had designed for horseback, while Joseph rode proudly in front of Hannah on gentle Sadie, now aging but still reliable. Before leaving the meadow, Hannah paused for a final look at the place that had witnessed so many pivotal moments in their journey: Grant's first declaration of love, their wedding vows, Hannah's first words, and now their children's introduction to this special sanctuary. "Ready, love?" Grant asked, noticing her hesitation. Hannah nodded, her voice clear and certain as she answered, "Yes, I'm ready." The words echoed their deeper meaning as the family descended the trail toward home, toward the future. They continued to build together in Silver Peak, one patient day at a time.